Greece has taken the controversial step of detaining all migrants who arrive on small boats from northern Africa and denying them the right to apply for asylum.
Greek answer to migration the government says the system cannot handle. On Friday, Greek lawmakers voted to suspend asylum applications for migrants arriving by sea from North Africa.
Right, so while Australia debates immigration policy, Greece is living through the nightmare of what happens when asylum seekers become entitled and refugee camps turn into war zones. We're talking about chaos, violence, and demands that would make your head spin. All happening right now in Greek refugee camps where asylum seekers are literally wreaking havoc because they're not getting what they want. Greek refugee camps are in complete chaos this summer as the small nation struggles to cope with over 7,000 asylum seekers who arrived in just the first half of 2025. But here's the kicker. These aren't grateful people seeking safety. These are entitled individuals demanding to be sent to richer countries, refusing to follow camp rules, and turning refugee facilities into battlegrounds. Today, I'm going to show you the brutal reality of what entitled asylum seekers have done to Greece, and why Australia needs to learn from this disaster before we end up with the same chaos in our own backyard. Because what's happening in Greece is coming to Australia if we don't wake up.
The only for me to claim asylum was crossing the channel.
You did have other options.
No.
You had asylum in Greece.
I had asylum in Greece, but as I mentioned, nobody wants to live in a tent.
Sure. How much did you pay the smugglers?
I paid €3,000.
Let's start with the most shocking reality. Greece, a country of just 10.4 million people, is currently hosting over 214,000 refugees and asylum seekers. That's like Australia taking in 5.5 million people proportionally. The country is completely overwhelmed, and the asylum seekers know it. But here's where it gets really disturbing. Instead of being grateful for safety and shelter, many asylum seekers in Greek camps have become entitled. They're demanding better conditions, refusing to stay in assigned locations, and literally rioting when they don't get what they want. The Moria camp on Lesbos has become synonymous with violence and chaos. Riots are commonplace. Fires are deliberately set. Asylum seekers clash with police regularly. This isn't desperation. It's entitlement gone mad. Sky News Australia reported that asylum seekers are wreaking havoc in Greek camps, demanding to be sent to other European countries instead of staying in Greece. Think about that for a second. They're not fleeing war anymore. They're shopping for the best welfare benefits. But the numbers tell the real story of this disaster.
Η ελληνική κυβέρνηση, ο Έλληνας Πρωθυπουργός ο Κυριάκος Μητσοτάκης θα πάρει όλα τα απαιτούμενα μέτρα για να προστατεύσει την πατρίδα μας από αυτό το οποίο γίνεται.
Here's the mathematical proof that Greece's asylum system has completely collapsed. In the first half of 2025 alone, 7,336 refugees arrived on Crete and the nearby island of Gavdos. That's over 40 people per day landing on small Greek islands that can't handle the influx. The situation got so bad that Greece took the unprecedented step of suspending asylum processing for 3 months. When a country has to stop accepting asylum applications entirely, you know the system has failed catastrophically. But get this. Greece has approved more than 140,000 asylum applications in just the last 5 years. They've been saying yes to everyone, and now they're drowning in the consequences. The country that was supposed to be a temporary stop has become a permanent dumping ground. Over 2,000 migrants landed on Crete in just one weekend recently, leading to anger among local authorities and tourism operators. Tourism is Greece's main industry, and asylum seekers are destroying it by turning holiday destinations into refugee camps. The Greek government is now transporting hundreds of migrants to mainland detention camps because the islands can't cope. But moving the problem around doesn't solve it. It just spreads the chaos. Here's what really shows the entitlement mentality. Asylum seekers in Greek camps aren't just asking for basic needs. They're demanding luxury conditions and throwing tantrums when they don't get them. Reports from camps describe asylum seekers complaining about food quality, accommodation standards, and processing times. They want faster internet, better meals, private rooms, and immediate transfers to Germany or other wealthy countries. When their demands aren't met, they riot, they set fires, they attack aid workers, they clash with the police. This isn't the behaviour of grateful refugees, it's the behaviour of entitled consumers who think they deserve five-star treatment. The violence has become so common that aid workers are facing growing hostility on Lesbos. People who came to help are being attacked by the very people they're trying to assist. That's not desperation. That's ingratitude on a massive scale. Mental health issues are exploding among asylum seekers, but not because of trauma from their home countries. It's because they're frustrated that Europe isn't giving them everything they want immediately. They're literally having mental breakdowns because reality doesn't match their expectations. But the impact on local Greeks is even worse.
Illegal immigration is a well-orchestrated business for the orchestrators to make a fortune and to Islamize Europe. You have filled our countries with illegal migrants with the blessing of Germany and France. We pay Islam that hates us out of our savings to turn our cities into ghettos and before our eyes in the name of Allah.
While asylum seekers complain about conditions, ordinary Greeks are watching their country being destroyed. Local residents on islands like Lesbos have had enough, and they're fighting back with protests and sometimes violence. Greek islanders have clashed with riot police in protests over migrant camps. They don't want their communities turned into refugee processing centres. They don't want their children's schools overcrowded with non-Greek speaking students. They don't want their neighbourhoods turned into no-go zones. Tourism operators are furious because asylum seekers are destroying Greece's reputation as a holiday destination. Who wants to vacation on an island overrun with refugee camps and constant riots? Local authorities are overwhelmed trying to provide services to people who don't speak Greek, don't understand Greek culture, and often don't want to integrate. The social fabric of Greek communities is being torn apart. But here's the most disturbing part. The Greek government is prioritising asylum seekers over its own citizens. Greeks are struggling with economic problems, but resources are being diverted to house, feed and process hundreds of thousands of foreigners. The resentment is building, and it's going to explode. When locals feel like foreigners are getting better treatment than citizens, that's a recipe for social breakdown.
This legislation suspends the submission of asylum applications, meaning that individuals who are detained will no longer enter the international protection process. As soon as an opportunity arises, they will be returned. This serves as a deterrent, as those attempting to come now know that, even though other routes into Europe exist, in Greece they will face detention, will not be allowed to apply for asylum, and will be returned without their asylum claims being registered.
Now here's why every Australian should be terrified by what's happening in Greece. We're following the exact same path. We're bringing in massive numbers of asylum seekers and refugees without proper planning or integration. Australia's immigration system is already showing signs of the same entitlement mentality. Asylum seekers complain about detention conditions, demand faster processing, and expect immediate access to welfare and housing. We're seeing the early stages of what happened in Greece. Overcrowded facilities, frustrated asylum seekers, and growing resentment from locals who feel their needs are being ignored. The difference is we still have time to change course. Greece didn't. They kept saying yes to everyone until the system collapsed completely. We can learn from their mistakes or we can repeat them, but our politicians seem determined to repeat them. They're increasing refugee intake without increasing infrastructure. They're prioritising asylum seekers over Australian citizens. They're creating the same conditions that led to chaos in Greece. The question isn't whether we'll have the same problems, it's when. Here are the brutal lessons from Greece that Australia needs to understand before it's too late. Lesson 1. Unlimited asylum acceptance leads to system collapse. Greece said yes to everyone and now can't cope with the numbers. Lesson 2. Asylum seekers become entitled when they realise the system is weak. They stop being grateful and start making demands. Lesson 3. Local populations will eventually fight back when they feel invaded. Greek islanders are rioting because they've had enough. Lesson 4. Tourism and economic activity suffer when areas become refugee camps. Greece's islands are losing their main industry. Lesson 5. Integration becomes impossible when numbers are too high. You can't integrate people who vastly outnumber locales. Lesson 6. Violence and chaos become normalised when authorities lose control. Greek camps are war zones because nobody's in charge. Lesson 7. Suspending asylum processing becomes necessary when the system fails. Greece had to stop accepting applications entirely. These aren't theoretical problems. They're happening right now in a European democracy. And they're coming to Australia unless we change course immediately. Here's the brutal reality, fellas. Australia has a choice. We can learn from Greece's disaster and implement strict controls on asylum seekers, or we can become the next Greece with refugee camps, entitled asylum seekers, and social chaos. The Greek model of unlimited acceptance and weak enforcement has failed catastrophically. Asylum seekers have become entitled consumers, shopping for the best benefits. Local populations have been overwhelmed and are fighting back. The entire system has collapsed. Australia is already showing the early warning signs: overcrowded detention facilities, asylum seekers making demands, politicians prioritising foreigners over citizens, and growing resentment from locals. We can still avoid Greece's fate, but only if we act now. We need strict caps on asylum seeker numbers. We need mandatory integration requirements. We need to prioritise Australian citizens over foreign asylum seekers. We need to learn that saying no is sometimes necessary. But our politicians seem determined to repeat Greece's mistakes. They think Australia is different, that we can handle unlimited numbers, that entitled asylum seekers won't cause the same problems here. They're wrong. Human nature is the same everywhere. When you create a system that rewards entitlement and punishes gratitude, you get entitled asylum seekers and social chaos. The choice is ours, and learn from Greece's disaster or become the next Greece. But we can't say we weren't warned. The evidence is overwhelming, the lessons are clear, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Greece tried to be generous and ended up with chaos. Australia can choose to be smart and avoid the same fate, but only if we act before it's too late. To see the latest Australian crisis, click this video here.